Saddle up and dance. to own it. Don't bitch and moan about it, please. God forbid you scrape your knees, and it's nothing to sneeze at. Oh, I've told you over and over again. You gotta get both hands around it and make your own plans. Roller coaster is taking over. It's about time.
Welcome to Revive Hi-Fi Canada, and today we are featuring the Wharfedale Diamond 9.5, again a tower speaker here on Revive Hi-Fi Canada, the channel where we are just trying to bring love, more love to this hobby that we love, looking at different speakers, amps, receivers, DACs, anything that we can get our hands on. And today we have the Wharfedale Diamond 9.5. I would call these a mini tower speaker, and the Wharfedale Diamond 9.5 being at 35.9 inches tall, so about 3 feet tall, makes me think about the question of which one do I prefer, a small tower or a bookshelf speaker? I prefer bookshelf speakers because of their high level of versatility, but a bookshelf speaker needs to go on a stand, and by the time you get it onto a stand, you're then at a higher level in terms of height. You're in a higher height than in many of these tower speakers, and you don't have the same level of bass all contained in the speaker, in the single speaker. So you can of course use your bookshelf speakers with a subwoofer, and that works out pretty well if you have everything, you know, well timed together, whereas the tower kind of has it all in one box and can get down to some pretty low levels, low frequencies, and you may or may not need the subwoofer. So the Wharfedale Diamond 9.5s, I'll start with their build quality. They're built extremely solid. Like, I had a hard time carrying these up. These are currently the fronts on my home theater system, using 4 Wharfedale Diamond 9.1s as the side speakers, as the satellites, and as well as the 3-way Wharfedale Diamond 9 center speaker. And this makes for a home theater that I don't see myself changing really ever. I truly enjoy watching movies on that setup. It is wonderful, and there's a reason why for that, and we'll talk a little bit more as we go along here. It is, as I mentioned, 36 inches tall, approximately 7 inches wide, and about 8 inches back. I do want to say before I go further, I love this speaker, but one thing that really disappointed me was that one of the surrounds for the mid-range drivers actually was torn when I received this speaker. Of course, I'm not the first owner, but at the same time, it was slightly disappointing. So I used a little bit of vulcanizing silicone and tried to fix that in its black vulcanizing silicone. I just put a tiny bit on that driver, and it seems to play extremely clear, and it doesn't seem to be propagating along the driver anymore. So that was good news. I was quite worried about that, that the more I played, the bigger I might have. No surround. I might have a completely torn speaker surround, so I was quite worried about that. It has a rear port on these, so the port is at the bottom. That is really the main thing I use as a handle to carry it up the stairs to bring them up to show and to play on the channel. They're extremely heavy. I would estimate their weight is probably close to about 50 pounds. So it's extremely heavy speakers. They have a bass driver on the bottom, and it is a 6.5 inch Kevlar woven bass driver. And the way it looks differently from the mid-range driver, I thought this was a passive radiating driver when I first saw the speaker, but I've done some checking, and of course I've done some testing, and it seems like these are not. That this is an actual bass driver, and it's a nice woven Kevlar cone. The mid-range driver is another 6.5 inch woven Kevlar cone, and the dome, the textile dome tweeter, is what I think also makes this speaker wonderful, as well as the other speakers in this Diamond 9 series. The dome tweeter does not play shrill at all, and we'll go into more about that later. It has a sensitivity of 88 dB and an impedance of 8 ohms nominal, so it's pretty good. You won't need a very strong amp to drive these. I'm driving it right now on here with a Marantz PM 6006 amp, and it drives them fine. I've tried them with my Fosi amp even, and it drove it fine. Below my Marantz there's the Cayenne, and of course that's 100 watts per channel, and it does great. I run with a Marantz AVR for my home theater receiver, and that does great as well. I think that is 100 watts per channel into 7 channels, and it does great. It has and I think that part of that is the sensitivity. That's 88 dB, so it's not, doesn't need a very powerful amplifier to drive them, so they're really nice speakers. They have a frequency response rated from plus or minus 3 dB, from 30 hertz to 24 kilohertz, and I agree. That is not exaggerated. These are far out from the wall right now. I would say they're about 8 to 10 inches out from the wall, the back wall, and they have extreme bass. They have thundering bass. I think that 30 hertz is real, and if you're just running this 2-channel, you may or may not need to have a subwoofer involved. I do run them with a subwoofer or 2 subs for my home theater, and it sounds really nice. They get a lot less stress that way, but they sound really nice. Let's start with the highs, and I mentioned the highs, and they have a textile dome tweeter, and typically with textile dome tweeters compared to more metal dome tweeters like aluminum, or they tend to, these softer dome tweeters have a little bit less harsh highs, and that's definitely the case here, almost to the point where, I think it's one of the more pleasant speakers I've ever had the chance of listening to. So the other speaker that was a tower that we had, the Bowers & Wilkins DM603S2, I do think that tower has similar types of softer highs, but I would imagine, I just think there's a slight bit more of detail coming out with the Bowers & Wilkins than these, but these win in other ways, in my opinion. They actually have other benefits, and we'll get to those in a minute. The bass, the mid-range driver is outstanding. It does an extremely good job, and it does convey voices. I would say voices on the 9.1 Wharfedale Diamond 9.1 are slightly better than on these, and I'm not sure if it has something to do with the 5.25 inch driver with the 9.1 versus the 6.5 inch driver, but there just seems to be a bit more clarity in the vocals with the Diamond 9.1. That's not saying that these aren't. That's saying that the Diamond 9.1 is that good, and I stand behind that. It's definitely good. The bass is where these are actually, they defy my logic, actually. I would just say these have a much more bass than those Bowers & Wilkins that I had. I would say that these have the most bass for these small towers that I've seen, considering the size. You know, it tapers off in the back and they're not very large. They have the rear port, and they're just super solid speakers, but their bass output is just quite something. And depending on the song, this is where maybe the mid-range does have some issues, is where the bass is so heavy that sometimes it drowns like a tiny bit of the mid-range out, but that's me nitpicking, and it really depends on the song. So if you've got an extremely bass heavy song, you might expect something like that. And these are typically, what you put in is what you get out with these speakers. They, you have a good source, it plays very well, and it feels like there's nothing really extreme in the highs, mids, or the lows, but until you get to music that is extremely bass heavy, then maybe the lows will come out, and that makes sense because it's playing what you're giving it. So I think it's overall outstanding. I can listen to these for hours. There's just such a nice, pleasant sound that they put out. I do think, though, that I would say that the energy of the music, because they're more on the laid-back side, these speakers, you sometimes maybe miss or lose a slight bit of that dynamic energy out of the music that you might have with another speaker. So I think they've voiced these to be a little bit more towards the laid back side, and I actually prefer that. I like that. I like listening to music for long periods of time, so it sits quite well with me. I also don't like screeching sounds in my movies, so these are very welcome in my home theater. I don't see myself ever changing them out. So they're just very well made, and they sound extremely good. I would say that the Soundstage on these, they can, for the size of the tower, it's pretty good. Like they cast a pretty wide soundstage, really big sound field. I would say they're pretty good. The imaging is also outstanding. You can hear all of the details, but in some cases I would say where songs are a little bit more complicated and have a lot of detail, even though these are a three-way speaker, so they're dividing up the different signals, I would say different frequency signals. I would say that there's a slight loss in mid-range detail in some cases, maybe in high-end detail as well. In the high frequency detail, there's a slight it's not quite as detailed as some other speakers, but that's kind of like the trade-off where you have a speaker that can get shrill when it has more detail, and you kind of have to walk that fine line between having more detail to the point where you're more shrill, to the point where you're not being shrill, but then you might lose a little bit of detail. And these do a pretty good job of walking that line. I would say you don't lose much detail, and you still have that very pleasant sound, and I think that's where these shine, at walking that line, and still giving you the bass that I still can't believe. Actually, the bass is really quite something on these. So yeah, I don't see myself ever getting rid of these anytime in the future, unless I have to, but I do appreciate these speakers very much, and happy to have them as a fronts on my home theater, and happy to use them even occasionally for listening to music. They shine in both of those cases. So again, I think that's all I have to say about these. Excellent speakers, great towers. Yeah, I really enjoy these, and thank you very much for watching. Thank you for those who subscribed, and please, if you want to support our channel, please subscribe. We really appreciate it. See you again next time on Revive Hi-Fi Canada. Thank you very much for watching. Bye now.